Hi, we have with us today Blake Schinto. You know, in the high end, about 80% of the properties we sell are held in trust. Probably overall company-wide, more than 50% are held in trust. And there's a lot of pitfalls we see. We've seen lawsuits, we've seen improper formatting of the purchase contract. And to make sense of it, we have Blake with us. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, James. So step number one is always finding out how title is held and what the name of that trust is. You can contact us at Progressive Title. We can pull up a copy of your deed, and I'll tell you the exact name of the trust as well as who the initial trustees are by reading it right off the deed we can provide to you.
So what happens if somebody does not have their property in a trust and they pass away and they die?
Great question. It all depends on how title's held. And so one of the benefits of having title in a trust is you avoid probate. Now, if you hold title as an individual and you pass away, you're probably going to go through the probate process. And as I'm sure many of you heard, that can be a lengthy and expensive process. There's other ways of holding title that will help avoid probate as well, joint tenancy, community property. But if you hold title as a tenant in common or as an individual, there's a good chance you're going to have to go through probate to provide, get that title squared away in terms of who actually is the rightful owner at that point when you pass.
So talk about purchasing a property in your trust. Before, the lenders would not really allow you to purchase property in the trust. You would close escrow in your name and then simultaneously transfer it into your trust. Have you seen that change?
Yeah, great question as well. And so yes, absolutely it's changed. As you mentioned, those of you that have been around in the past have probably seen that. A lot of lenders had hesitation in the past about allowing borrowers to close title in their trust. You would have to close an individual and then transfer into the trust. I'm seeing more and more lenders that are allowing you to take title in that trust, whether it's on a purchase or even on a refinance. So recommendation on that, talk to our friends here at Movement and CB Loans, and they can help make sure that you're taken care of in your specific situation.
So that helps a common pitfall that we've seen when you refinance, because you had to, in the past, you had to take it out of your trust name, put it in your individual name, refinance the property, and then oftentimes they would forget to put it back in the trust.
Yes.
Somebody would die, and then you had a mess.
That's correct. So even if you have a trust, if title's not held in that trust, you're in the same situation. The one little difference is, instead of having to go through an entire probate, there's something called a Hagstead petition. And so that you get a lawyer involved, and they're going to petition the court to change title back into that trust for your heirs. Rather than having to go through an entire probate, it's just that petition that changes title back in. It's still going to cost you a little bit and take a little bit of time, but not quite as much time as a probate. So with that being said, it's something you'll hear me talk about often. Always check to see how title's held, and it's a great thing you can remind your clients. You're here to add value, something of add value. Reach out to them. Do you know how title's held on your property? We can get you a copy of a deed. You call Kathleen, Mark, Kathy, and myself at Progressive. We'll get you a copy of that deed and tell you exactly how title's held, because you might have the exact situation like James mentioned. People forgot to put it back in the trust. So always a good idea to find out how title's held for that reason and many others. The second step is finding out who has the authority to sign on behalf of that trust. The initial deed will spell out who the initial trustees are, but if those trustees aren't available, we're going to need a copy of that trust to be provided by the heirs so we can go through it and see who the successor trustees are and who has the authority to sign on behalf of that trust now.
What are some of the pitfalls you see, and how can we help the agents navigate dealing with trusts?
Great question. So first thing to do always when you see a trust, find out exactly how title's held. Contact your Progressive Title rep. We can look up and get a copy of the actual deed and see how title's held. What is the name of that specific trust? The deed will spell that all out, and it'll spell out who the initial trustees are. That's going to give you the early start in terms of finding out who you need to get to sign.
Is it a good idea to have your seller provide a copy of the trust and have you look at it?
Absolutely. So when that title is held in the trust, the second step is going to be to get that trust documentation, especially if somebody's not available or deceased. So if someone's traveling overseas, they're sick and in a coma, or someone's passed away, the escrow and title company will absolutely need a copy of that trust to find out who else can sign on behalf of that trust with that original trustee not being available.
So we're really looking at, you have a living trust, which, we're seeing more and more properties in a living trust. I would say in the high end, 80%, probably overall, more than 50% of the properties we sell are in a living trust. That's not so bad if the people are still alive. But when it's a decedent's trust and there's a successor trustee, that's where we get into problems.
You are correct, and you're using all the right terminology as well. So you've got your initial trustee. If that initial trustee is not available, it's a successor trustee. That's the next person in line who's going to be signing on behalf of the trust. And as James mentioned, when you got a successor trustee that's signing, we need to know what happened to the original trustee. Are they deceased? And then we'll need a copy of the death certificate. Or are they unavailable because they're in a coma? We need physician letters that will state that and prove that that's the case. So we need to make sure we're getting the right signatures, and it's always better to find that out up front rather than at the last minute when you're in escrow.
So if there is a trustee that is deceased, we also need a copy of the death certificate, correct?
That is correct. The final step is making sure you fill out your paperwork properly. By doing all those initial first two steps, it's going to help you avoid the pitfalls of having the incorrect signatories signing the documentation. So make sure you get that document up front. Get the deed, look over that trust with the title company. We can make sure we got the right signatures going on there, and then fill out the correct forms, such as the representative capacity form, so that you're going to be covered and have the right documentation up front.
How do we properly fill out the listing agreement and the purchase contract?
Yeah, so great questions. A lot of you guys already do this. A lot of our great RE/MAX agents do this already. You'll have us at Progressive Title get involved early and look at that trust and find out to make sure who does need to sign in this situation, and look to see what other documents you need, that death certificate or the physician letters, things along those lines. But you want to make sure you know who to get signing, and then when you're going to be signing the documentation with the listing agreement, the representative capacity form through CAR is a great form to utilize, because it'll help spell out who is signing and what their capacity is, how they're signing it. And that will help make the rest of the documentation a lot easier. And then escrow and title, we kind of have it all set on our side as well.
So I agree with you that representative capacity form was a game changer when it came out a couple years ago, and with the new forms revision, that paragraph is going to be incorporated into the purchase agreement and also the listing agreement. So they're getting smart over there.
Yeah, they are getting smart. They've got some good attorneys there that are making it easy, and the more of that kind of stuff they do, the better chance you have your documentation being correct on the listing side and the contract side. The escrow and title, whether it's our friends at Peninsula and at Progressive, we're going to make sure the deeds and the documentation when you're in escrow are correct. But that upfront document, we can help you with it if you look at it up front, but a lot of times, sometimes people are doing that without us up front.
So to recap, we need to figure out what type of trust it is held if it's held in a trust. We need to figure out who has authority to sign on behalf of the trust. And we need to be able to fill out the paperwork properly to avoid pitfalls. Get Progressive Title involved early, and thank you so much for joining us, Blake.
Thank you for having me, James. Love being here.